Back with us on the SportsMax Zone. Cricket is what we're going to talk about now because Windies batsman Andre Fletcher is confident the team can win the three-match T20 International Series against hosts New Zealand. The team played their first T20 match in New Zealand in February 2006, with the Kiwis winning in a bowl-out, as they called it then. This after both teams had been restricted to 126 of their initial 20 overs. Now, the last time the teams met in New Zealand took the three-match series, played between December 29, 2017 and January 3, 2018. They won 2-0 in one. The second game of the series, there was a no result. Now, Fletcher, who goes by the name Spiceman, says, quote, "This is my third time in New Zealand. The team goal for me is to actually make sure we can win this series. My individual goal is to make sure I can get as many runs as possible so I can actually cement my spot in the squad. I've become a more positive player. My shot selection has improved. I've worked hard on the physical part of my game. I've been putting in a lot of strength work behind the scenes, and it pays off." That's Andre Spiceman Fletcher, one of the most entertaining players in the recent CPL. He or CPL played, of course, in the Caribbean. Joining us to look ahead to the series is Fazeer Mohammed. Fazeer, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, George. Good to be with you once again.
Great. Based on the matchup, New Zealand versus the West Indies in T20 cricket, the area that we are most potent, the Caribbean boys, are you sharing Andre Fletcher's optimism that the Windies can win?
Yeah, I think the West Indies certainly can win. The issue will be whether or not they are motivated enough to really pull out all the stops. And I suspect that has a lot to do with the selection of the squad, which has been a major talking point. A lot of the established stars are missing. And therefore, it's an opportunity for players like Andre Fletcher, for other players who might not have usually featured in a West Indies T20 squad, to really try to make some sort of impact. The likes of Kyle Mayers, for example, Sheldon Cottrell has been a bit inconsistent. Fabian Allen establishing himself in the team. And of course, you've got the likes of Nicholas Pooran, really celebrated as one of the leading lights of the T20 format. So you've got players at different stages of their careers. And if it were a World T20, you'd certainly say that the West Indies would definitely be fired up for it. If it were the established stars, all of the best players playing in this series, you might say, well, they may not be all that fired up, but given the composition of the squad and the motivation to get into a World T20 squad in about 10 months' time, I think they'll be really fired up. But let's not discount New Zealand. But I expect that to be a competitive series, quite unlike the Test series.
On the point of competition and the players involved, and even drawing a parallel with the Test, let's go with that narrative, Fazeer. Unlike the Test game, where there are really places begging for competent people to step forward and own, the white ball game, well, let me not get ahead of myself too excited, not say white ball, say T20. T20 is very competitive where the West Indies are concerned because, as you say, given the big names that we have, when they're all available and all interested in playing whatever series the West Indies are engaged in, then there are some other good, perhaps even very decent players who won't get a look in. And you're saying then that this offers a chance, given the very competitive nature of getting into a Windies T20 side, for some players to stake their claim for a permanent place, as expressed by Andre Fletcher in the quote graphic we just presented earlier.
Absolutely, George. And you look at the West Indies ranking in T20s. We are the World T20 holders. We were champions twice of the last three tournaments, yet we're way down. And that reinforces the point that the team or the individual players aren't necessarily motivated outside of a World T20. And therefore, this is the opportunity for those players. And that is why I would expect them to play with tremendous levels of motivation. If they don't, then they would have sent a clear message to the selectors that you've wasted your time picking us, and therefore I would expect them to really be fired up.
Yeah, looking at Andre Fletcher's individual performance in the recent CPL, he was very entertaining with the gloves, very entertaining with the bat, and he also scored some good runs. Internationally, just over 40 T20 internationals for the West Indies, a strike rate of about 108, an average of 21 thereabouts, and 6 half centuries. Do you think that he's at that stage in his career and his own development where you expect to see more consistency and a consolidation of that consistency?
Well, by his own statement, he's set the challenge out for himself. He needs to step it up. 108 runs for 100 balls is pedestrian. at the top level if you're talking about World T20 stuff or franchise stuff, IPL, that sort of thing. But he has the ability, and as you said, we've seen it in the CPL, and now he needs to turn it on because you never know what could happen in 10 months' time. Will Chris Gayle be fully fit? Evan Lewis is always carrying an injury of some sort every occasion. You've got places there that may not be seen as wide open, but they are available if you do make a statement by showing that level of performance and consistent performance. And let's not forget, New Zealand are no pushovers either in T20 cricket. They're an extremely well-drilled, well-prepared team. So any performance against that type of opposition will certainly garner the attention of the selectors.
Yeah, you spoke just now, Faz and George, about motivation and how charged up these players would be. But I have gotten the clear indication over the past few years that trying to catch the eyes of the scouts from the IPL is also a motivational factor for players who are focusing on T20 cricket. I know the tournament, the IPL is just finishing now, so they would have to look to next year. But I think many of the West Indies players, when they go into a T20 format, they want to catch the eyes of the IPL recruits as well.
Absolutely. I don't think there's any disagreement with that at all. It is the way of the world right now. In the same way that footballers, yes, they will always tell you they want to play for their country, they want to play for their Caribbean national team and so on. But they are thinking the big contracts. They are thinking to get the opportunity, whether in the MLS and the bigger ones, of course, in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And this is the way of the world now. But again, for what it's worth, as much as we may not feel comfortable talking about it, if these players, some of them, see the West Indies team as a stepping stone to a big contract in the IPL, it can only be down to the benefit of the West Indies team anyway. And you've got someone like a Kieron Pollard, who's your captain, who's seen it all, who can probably just put it in perspective for them that, look, you're playing for the West Indies, it matters still. Yes, there will always be those opportunities and you'll always get those opportunities, but what better way to put yourself in the shop window than perform at international level, get a place in a World T20 squad, and that's the ultimate shop window outside of a franchise tournament like an IPL. So I think there's every motivation that will redound to the West Indies team and to the players getting the attention of those franchises everywhere across the cricketing world.
Yeah, there was a Cricinfo story earlier on today, Faz, as well, about some key players in the New Zealand setup battling some injuries like Tim Southee and so on. Would that be something that the West Indies would look at as well? Because in analysing what your strategy is and your game plan, you need to know what your opposition is about.
Well, it depends, Lance, on whether or not those three players that you mentioned will be seen as part of the T20 setup or part of the test setup. And remember, even right now, today, we are still 3 weeks away from that first T20 match. So yes, you want to keep it in mind. You want to have an idea of the strengths and weaknesses of your opposition. But I don't think at this stage, either Simmons or Pollard or any of the senior men in the squad or any of the players generally will be too worked up about who's carrying a niggle, who's carrying an injury with the opposition. In any event, you've got to ensure that you've got all the bases covered with your game anyway. And as I said, there's still 3 weeks to go. That's a long, long time.
Yeah, Faz, you just attached some respect to the New Zealand setup, not only T20 cricket, because we know they're a solid outfit no matter what format they're into. You've been covering international cricket now for decades, Faz, not to give your age away too much, but what is it about this New Zealand team that troubles everyone? Because we've seen them give the best teams in the world a lot of trouble on their day.
Well, let me put it in a way that maybe we could get it in a Caribbean context. Talawa. Just to give you the Jamaican phrase, or bad mind, as we would say in Trinidad and Tobago, where you feel that no one regards you. It's sort of the same idea with Scotland. When Scotland plays England in a friendly football international, it's not friendly because the Scots always believe they are looked down upon. And New Zealand, and especially New Zealand rugby, for anyone who's been there, who's experienced that environment, they will understand that sport is a way that a country like New Zealand sees itself making a huge impact on the world stage. That and the fact that New Zealand, again, because of their isolation, because of their history, because of the way this country would have developed so far away, even though they're just 2 hours away from Australia, they look towards Australia and are considered the poor cousins of that part of the world. So it is a sense of being, a sense of identity. That's why you'll always see every New Zealand team trying extremely hard, almost playing outside of their capabilities. You always hear about an overperforming New Zealand team. You hardly ever hear about an underperforming New Zealand team. They might have had a few bad patches in international cricket every so often. But in sport in general and cricket in particular, New Zealand they don't make a big deal about individual players. It's about the end result of playing for your team and giving everything for that little country way down in the South Pacific that is punching way above its weight.
Yeah, another time, Faz, we will talk about the very real issue of how come it is that the defeat suffered by the West Indies and the disappointment suffered by the West Indies under Ricky Skerritt's watch are not being labeled as Ricky Skerritt not doing his job, hence the West Indies are losing, while when Dave Cameron was in office, the West Indies team lost. Dave Cameron got it on social media. I'd like to hear what your theory is about why the criticism of this current Cricket West Indies president, when the team loses, is not the same as when his predecessor was in the chair. You can prepare for that.
We should call this the Rattle My Cage segment, because I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent, excellent. All the best to Mohammed Electrical.
Take care.
Good. Fazeer Mohammed there. We close the segment.